Do you ever lose your cool and yell at someone? Is that ever okay? How do you bounce back from it, or should you? Oh, what a great question. So this is actually a very good personal question for me because I'm an interesting character when it comes to this. My personality, I think I inherited this from my grandmother, my grandfather, maternal grandfather, and probably my mother a little bit, emotionally volatile. And I am too. So feel the emotion strongly and it comes and it's gone. Sometimes it sticks because you're stuck in thought and then you're in this kind of loop. Now, what you're pointing at is this kind of volatility of anger. And you're manifesting it by actually yelling at someone, like just letting them have it. So what is that really when we inquire, what is that? So maybe anger itself is this energetic pattern of emotion, energy in motion, emotion, right? So you feel it somewhere in the body and it can have a trigger in thought even. So there's this rumination that this person has somehow violated my boundary. Anger is often a boundary violation. That's why people get angry about a couple of things. Let's go back to vaccine for a second because I think this ties it all nicely. Anger is a boundary violation emotion. So if you feel like someone's forcing you to get a vaccine when it doesn't make common sense and you're going to lose your job over it, they've violated your boundaries. They want to do something to your body without your consent and take away your livelihood if you don't do it. Okay, that's going to make you mad. You're going to feel anger as a response to that thought stream of, because this is all made up, by the way. This world is all made up. It's all just consciousness. So, but it feels real in the relative sense. So it triggers this emotion, which is an energy, which is an ancient sort of human energy, and you get angry, right? Now, what if you're a 70-year-old who is nervous to go out because they have an have an immune deficiency or something else going on, and people around them are coughing and wheezing and they won't wear a mask out of courtesy or they won't get vaccinated. And the perception then is that I'm at risk now and the sanctity of my body is being violated by these unclean people. Like that's a perception. That's another moral filter, right? Well, they're going to get angry. So this anger is a boundary violation kind of car alarm type of thing. It's evolved. It's really quite natural. Now, what do you do with it is where wisdom can come into play, or it can sometimes fail. So for me, I get quite volatile, but one of my characteristics is, and this is just being completely transparent because you have to feel into who you are and how you behave in terms of who you are, meaning personality-wise, like what's your conditioning? My conditioning is I tend to seek validation in others, whether it's here on YouTube, whether it's on social media, whether it's from a teacher, whether it's from an authority figure. I tend to seek that validation, but there's a part of me that wants to overthrow all of it, that wants to oppose the entire hierarchy of it. So it's this deep contradiction. Like people who are into the Enneagram, I'm a type 6. The 6 is a walking contradiction, which is why I love this alt-middle idea, right? It's like, yeah, you can be all those things. So that said, I tend to kind of smooth things over with relationships with other people and try to make it smooth. But at some point, if things push, then what'll happen is it'll trigger a kind of thought thread where it's like, no, this person's really taking advantage of me. Or I can't believe they said this. I cannot believe how unjust this is. I have a very strong justice versus sort of cheating, sort of fairness, moral taste bud for me. That's a big one. Like if you're a big cheater, like I get upset. So it's just part of how I'm wired in terms of the moral stuff, because it's like liberty versus oppression, fairness versus cheating, care versus harm, authority versus subversion, sanctity versus degradation. These are kind of the big moral taste buds. For me, that fairness versus cheating is a big one. So it'll trigger these thoughts like, then you'll start ruminating on, this person. And then they do it again, but I don't have the courage to just tell them transparently, like, this is what you're doing needs to stop. So what'll happen is it'll keep going, and I'll keep ruminating. And then at some point, it'll just snap because there's only so much, right? And the thoughts keep reinforcing the emotion, and the emotion has a physical manifestation. And it's so uncomfortable that at some point, something feels like it has to be done. You're not doing any of this. There's no agent there. But it feels like it has to be done, and then you just let that person have it. You just unleash hell on them. I've done it many times, and it feels both horrible and great in the moment. Horrible meaning physically, it's like a kind of, you can tell your blood pressure is high. I could measure my blood pressure, it'll be high. But it feels great because you're letting out all this energy that has been just circulating with nowhere to go, and it's being fed by this thought storm of angry thoughts that keep coming up, and injustice and all this other stuff. And so then you let all this out. Clearly the person that you're letting it out on is like, what the hell? Because it's coming out of nowhere because you've been suppressing it for so long. You've been repressing and avoiding that emotion and jumping into thought to try to avoid it by ruminating more. And all it's doing is like circulating this energy in motion. And then you just let it blaze. Now, there are good and bad things here. The good thing is you let it out. The bad thing is you did it in a way that is almost the equivalent of a verbal violence, right? Now, hopefully it didn't escalate to physical violence, but the verbal violence is there. Like you're just letting somebody have it. And so how do you feel about it? Well, immediately, very quickly, I start to feel regret, shame, a bunch of other emotions arise because I shouldn't be doing this, right? Like this is not very wise behavior. And the problem is sometimes what you'll notice is with this kind of angry outburst, what you'll notice is that it was effective. In other words, if the energy of that anger was a response to a boundary violation where they're pushing you in some way, pushing your boundaries, not respecting the boundaries because you haven't really set them up, honestly, by going off like that, the chances are they're going to be scared enough that they're not going to, depending on the volatility level, you're going to have the outcome that you wanted from a boundary standpoint. So anger had its role there. You're like, oh, okay, mission accomplished. However, you've damaged a relationship. You've looked like an asshole. You feel internally bad about it because that's not how you want to behave. And the truth is, if you hadn't repressed the anger in the first place, if you'd actually felt it and noticed what it is, and then you were authentic with that person up front and consistently, there never would have gotten to the point where that boundary would have been explosively violated, right? It would have been something where you would have been more honest up front and it never would have escalated. There would have been an authenticity in your communication because you would have spoken spontaneously from the truth of that moment, which is, oh, I'm feeling a little of this. What is this? And then communicating, hey, I don't want to do that. It's the thing about me is I don't like it when this kind of thing happens. So we can't do that. And that would have happened consistently before it got to a level where you had to let somebody have it. Now, all that being said, you couldn't have done anything differently because you were exactly in that moment doing the thing. And when you had the outburst, you had the outburst. But what it provides an opportunity to do is go, okay, so what is it about me that allowed that to happen? And the truth is, well, I'm avoiding repressing this anger. I'm trying to validate and people please, whatever it is in your experience that does that. And next time, I'm not going to allow it to get to that level. I'm going to be very direct. I'll be kind and compassionate, but I'll be authentically direct. And that comes from practice. It comes from emotion work. It comes from feeling those energies and actually discerning what they are, not necessarily telling big stories about them, but allowing them just as they are. And that allows for a very authentic kind of interaction with other humans. And that's part of the whole realization, awakening journey, is a journey back to authenticity, to spontaneous action from the present moment, which is all there is, without all the thought rumination that throws us into a projection that doesn't exist. And that ultimately leads to human suffering in the form of, okay, now I've blown up. Or worse, we've gotten violent or something terrible has happened, right? So that's my take on your very good question.